Hi, everyone, and thank you all for coming. My name is Reem Saleh, and I'm the Associate Director of External Relations and Partnerships at the Art Center at NYU Abu Dhabi. This art chat is part of our virtual Off the Stage series, which also includes community dinner, visits to the NYUAD classes, and post-show Q&As. Even though we're not able to meet in person, unfortunately, we still want to bring the artists to our community. Subscribe to our newsletter or check out the Off the Stage tab on our website. I want to thank Abigail Browde and Michael Silverstone from the award-winning theater company 600 Highwaymen for taking the time to chat with us. This talk is moderated by Shalini Korea, NYUAD Rising Senior. I also want to thank the Career Development Center at NYU Abu Dhabi for partnering with us. As a reminder, and as you noticed, this arts chat will be recorded for social media and internal archiving purposes. Now, handing over to Shalini.
Hi, everyone. As Reem said, I'm Shalini, and I'm a rising senior majoring in theater and political science. And I don't know if Abby and Michael really remember, but I actually met them in fall of 2017 in my freshman year. And I did a workshop, the monologue workshop with them way back when I was a freshman. So yeah, it's been a while. And in the past week also, I've met them a couple of times at community dinners and workshops and stuff like that. And I hope this won't be my last conversation with them. But yeah, this is my first, I guess, which is the arts chat about how to sustain a successful theater company. So first, I'll be engaging in conversation with Abby and Michael, and then I'll open up the conversation for questions, which you can put in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. So yeah, without further ado, Abby and Michael, do you want to tell us a bit about yourselves and your company?
Sure. We are we work in partnership to make theatrical performances. We work under the name 600 Highwaymen. We're also married, so we have a lot of overlap in our lives between what we do, what our work is, and what our life is. And there's not a ton of separation between those two things. We are primarily based in Brooklyn, New York, but these days we're spending most of our time in upstate in a very small town in Albany County, New York.
We both went to NYU, actually. Mm-hmm. We both studied at the Experimental Theater Wing at NYU. We have been making shows for how long?
Since 2009.
And I mean,
and this is Pablo.
Oh, this is our dog Pablo. I mean, I could talk a little bit about the idea of theater company and how we relate to that. But I also want to, if you would like to start us in a different place, we could absolutely do that.
No, I was actually thinking of starting with like a question about like your organization itself and sort of its inception, like how did you form it, like specifically with regards to like mastering the motivation to like start your own theater company, or like having that motivation and knowing like where to channel it, how to channel the money, the funds, all of that to start something new. So
Sure. Well, we started our theater company around the idea of actually not having a theater company in a way. We started our theater company because it is a theater company, I guess. We started our experience together with experimentation and really focusing around making projects. So we didn't start with a name. We didn't start with a board. We didn't start with the idea of artistic positions and separation. We didn't start with a company. We started with a space more than anything. We started with a church basement, which is just, I'm pointing this direction because it's on this block. It's a church basement near where we live, obviously. And the other thing that I would say that we started with as a theater company was rejection, actually. We started working together in this church basement because we couldn't really find other places that wanted to do our work, and we couldn't really find other places that that wanted to do our work that made financial sense to us. So we instead decided to find our own space for free, where the there was no financial transaction between us and the proprietors of the space. It was more based on friendship and community and a kind of mutual aid. It's a old recreation room in a church basement. So that was really how our theater company began. It began out of practice and making theater, making a couple projects that were sort of without that much intention. And then it wasn't until our third project that we said, okay, well, we better figure out what to call this. Maybe our second project. It wasn't until our third, maybe a couple years down, that we said, okay, well, we've been resistant to creating a company name, but it seems like not having a company name is sort of in the way. And that's when we came up with the idea of naming it 600 Highwaymen.
The other thing to say about that time is that we had both been working after, I mean, this was several years after we had graduated from college. So we had been working independently and trying to sort of get our work going in the way that you do when you're just out of college and you're sort of like a bit of a hustle and figuring out who you are and what you want to do and what you want to contribute and how you want to do it. And but as Michael said, the choices that we made very early on were all about putting the work central and make the work first. There was no, like you said, no name, no logo, no letterhead. It was all about, we don't even know who we are yet. So how can we don't even know if this is going to work. And it was putting that first and foremost.
And it meant that we could kind of stay away from all of the business side. We could avoid some of the business aspects of what is a strange business anyway. And we could just get in the room with people and try to start making shows. Mm-hmm. And we were able to follow our impulses really quickly. Like we had an idea that we wanted to leave at one point we had an idea that we wanted to leave New York and make a show somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And so within like a very short amount of time, probably a week, we got in the car and moved to a different city and stayed there for 6 months and made the show out of a bingo hall. But it meant that we could be really nimble and we could move quickly without worrying about having to necessarily articulate mm-hmm. the mission. And that was really, really important for us.
Nimbleness continues to be important, I think.
Yeah, but that was also a long time ago, and now things are very different. But I do think that we try to hold on to that mm-hmm. that spirit and that really magical period for us.
I think that there's sort of an interesting parallel to, so we're sort of saying, well, like, you know, are we a theater company? We don't really embrace that term. We do, but at least we didn't at the beginning. And I think that there's something interesting about the title of this talk as well, because it's about sustaining. And I think that word in particular, the idea to sustain, I think sometimes I find to be tricky when we're talking about some of the things about surviving as an artist and over long periods of time, that the idea of sustain feels like it's something about keeping things really solid and consistent and smooth. And actually, I think that there's what I've learned or what we've learned is that to sustain is actually always a series of pivoting. It's much more. There is no there. There is no fixed situation. It's always responding to circumstance, fluctuating, financial, political, emotional, creative impulses. And so the idea of sustainment is always a series of like riding a wave, but that's
sustainability. Right. Can I say one more thing and then we're going to stop talking? I think we figured out early on that for us, it was going to be about relationships. I remember we made our first show, and it was a show that it had 3 people in it, and it was performed in this church basement. It was kind of a clown show now that I look back and think about it. But we thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could get like a New York Times review? Like, wouldn't that be great if we could just somehow figure out how to make that happen for ourselves? And so we thought, okay, well, we could hire a press rep, or I think that's all we thought. We thought, well, that sounds expensive. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like we'd have to articulate this to somebody who would then have to sell it. And we thought, well, what if we just actually just try to write a really nice email to the New York Times? Because it seems like, we can find their email address. It's not that difficult. And we more or less did that. and they more or less responded. And then they more or less, they did review the show. And it wasn't that it was a great review, but I think it opened our eyes in terms of what we could make happen just by just thinking through things a little bit and figuring out, okay, well, what do we want to try to achieve? Well, I wonder if we could make that happen. And then that sort of carried us forward as we went to, when we moved to Austin to make this show, we had this idea, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could make this production of Death of a Salesman in this huge cavernous bingo hall on the interstate? And by that point, we had enough courage to say, okay, well, let's just walk in and see if we can, let's see if we can just meet somebody. And then we met somebody, and then we had the keys. So, I mean, I'm glorifying it and romanticizing it and simplifying it. But the point is that we didn't sit behind our computers and think, okay, well, we have to hire somebody, or we have to create a letterhead, or we have to we didn't have a website. And that was sort of mind blowing to realize, actually, you can get a lot done if you just find the way to talk to people.
So my next question actually does have something to do with like making things happen in like big cities. Cause I was just thinking about like New York, for example, right? Like it's a place that seems to be like saturated with artists who are like all trying to like make it, you know, and all trying to like achieve this thing and like be noticed, be seen. And I was just wondering like how do you like get about establishing yourself in a place like New York? Where there are a lot of people also trying to do the same thing as you, like how you sort of differentiate yourself and from like even when it comes to like grants and stuff?
Yeah, I would answer it by saying the first thing is to put the work first. Like that the work, that there has to be, you have to be focusing primarily on the work you're making. You have to be giving yourselves opportunities to fail. I had advice from a professor when I was in college who said, you know, your first 5 shows out of school, or she said some number, I don't remember. She said, they're going to be terrible, and that's okay. They're supposed to be terrible.
You, of course, don't think they're terrible.
No. You think they're perfect, and they were, and I put everything into them. But like the sense of you have to there's no way to, like art is a practice, right? You just have to keep making, and you have to keep making. I would say there's a side of getting noticed is like noticing. People will notice when your work is really unique, really yours, really clear-eyed, really ambitious. But that is a process. So your first piece shouldn't be, and hopefully it actually wouldn't be the one that like everyone notices, because to be honest, that sets up the better muscle to develop is the one that's like, go back to work. Just go back to work.
Early on, we learned to ask people for help, and that has been a huge thing for us. Someone gave me the advice once that like once you offer someone, once you're of help to somebody, you want to keep being of help. Like mentorship is not just about the person who's receiving help, but it's also about like, we love helping people. You know, it's so much fun. It's so gratifying. It's this like hidden reward of living, of like, you know, wow, this person needs something that I guess I have, that I've maybe that I've maybe forgotten about or lost sense of, and I can help them. And early on, we asked people for help. We asked people to give us advice. We asked people to come in and watch rehearsal. And then one thing that I think the real piece of advice that I really liked was what this person said to me, which is, look, if you ask me for help, keep asking me, because it feels really good. And and it happened to be a person who actually had a lot to offer. So I think early on, we identified, you know, mentors, people who could guide us, people who could help connect us to people. Like people want to help. I desperately want to help as much as possible. It's a way for us all to sort of, to pay it forward. And it just feels so good. So I think not being afraid to ask for help is key. And then the other thing that we did early on was we kept a list. I mean, this is not that radical, but we kept a list of all the people that we wanted to invite to our shows. And that list was probably, 30 or 40 people. And in the beginning, maybe we could only really access 2 or 3 people, but that really grows. And the more you, eventually we were able to bring people into our room. And that was really what it was about, is having them see our work.
I think that's sort of related to the idea that I think we both did a lot of when we were super early career, like early out of college, even before we were working together, is that we saw a lot of work. We were seeing, I know that this is a very complicated thing in these moments where we're stuck inside and prevented from traveling and all that stuff, but we would go and see as much as we could. I was an usher at a theater, so I could go see things for free. And then you discover your taste through seeing, and you also discover who you emulate. It's like, I want to make a show like that person, or I want to make a show like that person, but I also want to make it more like that. And you start to also weed out influence and reject influence too. It's like, yes, that, but not this. And that's how you refine your voice. And I think that also gives you the sense of, when it comes to the moments where you're like trying to push your work forward, like you're saying, Shalini, and like get attention or be seen, you then have a sense of who you want to see you, who you want, like, okay, that theater is the place that is doing work that I really admire. That artistic director is really interesting. That artist is really someone I'm a bit of a fan of. Like, all that starts to help give you, I think, some clear-eyed to vision, or to what you can imagine. It's hard to imagine a future for yourself, or it's hard to imagine a kind of goal or or like, this is where I want to put myself in 5 years, if you don't see those things, and if you don't have a sense of what's out there, where it's happening, what's possible.
That's super interesting, because like, I guess then what you're saying is that like, what sort of drives your company in terms of relationships and stuff too depends on the form. And with regards to that, like how, like you said, you didn't start out thinking like, oh, you want to make this type of work, and you sort of figured it out along the way. I think you said, like, in that sense, like how did you end up developing this like interdisciplinary, I think you described it as genre bending style, like sort of how did that come to be?
Well, I think that's just style that I don't even know how to, okay, I just want to back up and say one thing. I think the thing that has been really critical for us is deadlines. Like, from a very early point, we forced ourselves to make, like, that is like, we're still doing that. That's the only way we're getting anything done, is by setting a series of deadlines. And within a deadline is a bunch of mini deadlines, but we've been setting deadlines for ourselves since the moment we started. Before anyone wanted anything of us, we set internal demands of ourselves. So we would say, okay, well, we're going to start working on a show, and we opened a blank calendar, and we said, let's open here. And then that means, great. So we're going to do an open dress here. Okay, great. Which means we better cast it here. And then we just kept doing that. We signed up for every opportunity to present a work in progress, every opportunity to do a workshop, just everything that we could we knew that we would, if we waited around till we had inspiration, which is, I think, a made up term, and I don't relate to that idea at all. For me, for us, I think it's always a process of making something and looking at it and then changing it. It's much more of a athletic, responsive, muscular thing than you just pick a starting point. You just start with something and then you keep working. So it's, okay, I got off track.
You're just talking.
The deadlines is key. And it's so simple. We bought a calendar and you put the date on there. It wasn't until after we had been working together for about 4 years, maybe 3 or 4 years, that someone else asked us for a deadline, that someone else had something they wanted of us. They were all self-imposed up to that point. We were self-producing. We were forcing people, forcing spaces to give us a time. We were renting rooms and saying we're going to do the show, but it wasn't for quite a while until someone else said, would you do this here on this date? But what was your question? Because
It was about nimbleness of form.
Yeah, it was just about the form, basically.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I think we have something in us that doesn't, well, I think that we like each project to be a completely different set of restrictions and problems and challenges. Like each of our pieces is a little bit of structural problem. There's some kind of a puzzle to it. There's some kind of a impossibility to it. We like puzzles, and we like setting ourselves up to try to find our way through like a maze. But I have no idea where actual those sort of stylistic things come from at all.
I mean, I think part of it is that nothing is a given when we start a piece. There's no, like, anytime we're like assuming something and we're like, oh, an audience comes into a room. Like, let's look at the basic assumptions. Is like, what are we assuming here? And we're always sort of like, well, what if that's not the case? What if that's not the case? But I do think it's also related to our rejection of the concept of theater company, is that we always wanted to have as much creative freedom as we possibly can. But yeah, I think that's just us and our personalities and our interests. You know, we have colleagues and friends who are, you know, it's what they make is a continually within a sort of formal structure. And I think I don't think that's an lesser of value, of lesser value, excuse me.
We although often, generally we have a new like acting ensemble with each or cast for each of our shows. We tend to have, or we do have, designers who are constant through our pieces. And that has been really great because they've been able to, it's like your one piece is always influencing another, and it's helpful if you have a collaborator who understands the ancestry of all these things and how they all connect and can say, okay, well, this and that you can create a shared language together. It's often really, I find it really exciting to have new actors for every project, because it means that we're not pulling from old vocabulary. We're making a new language together. I mean, that's always the challenge with theater, right? And the group of people you work with is that you create your own language. Oftentimes that language is really incredible, but then it can become very insidery. And suddenly you become you're referencing yourself in a way. And I remember when we were New York theater, we didn't want to make something that felt like it was referencing it. We didn't want to make projects that felt like it was like they were referencing themselves. But we have found that working with design collaborators over an extended period of time really is useful for us.
That's also how we divide up the labor of creation. And I think that we're having more dramaturgical conversations with our designers than we are necessarily with performers. But anyway.
Yeah, so like in terms of collaborators as well, like you said, you have like many different collaborators for different projects. So I was just wondering, like, how do you sort of decide who you want to collaborate with? And on that similar vein, I think because quite a few of us would be interested in like being in theater companies like yours. What do you sort of look for in those long-term collaborators that you mentioned? Like, what are the things that make you think like, oh, we want these people for the long?
I think, first of all, those collaborations happened organically, which is not it's just they happened because they worked, and then they kept working, and then suddenly they became relationships. But our longest term collaborator, like we worked with him so long, is because when we were first starting out, when we were like, oh, we need some extension cords. I wonder who can meet us here in 4 hours. It was him. And then it was like, oh, I want to sit in on the rehearsal. Oh, let me talk about what I saw. And it's not that these collaborations we've gone through a lot of challenge. He would say the same thing. There is friction. Mm-hmm. That friction is super, super useful. It's not, the collaborations aren't based on a like-mindedness, it isn't because we see things the same way. It's because there is real dialogue. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really important. Collaboration doesn't always mean agreement. We have had, as a matter of fact, with this collaborator, it is very much not about agreement, but it's about learning from each other and influencing each other and defending what you think is right and taking turns sort of.
He's our scenic and lighting designer on a lot of our projects. So he, for 1,000 Ways, for example, obviously didn't design a set or any lighting, but has been has tried out the project, has given us his perspective on it, has given us some feedback, you know, because he understands, like Michael said, the ancestry of our work. I think
shared value, if I could say it, although I didn't know it at the time, but this designer, we share the same values, mm-hmm. right? We have a lot of the same theatrical values and also values in life. No, I don't mean to say that it's about, we have the same lifestyle.
Because we actually don't. But
we don't. No, it's more.
What's important to us in a room is somehow it's shared. It's shared in different ways, but he is looking. I think he's looking at. We sort of overlap with like where our barometers are. I guess when we're evaluating something of like that felt too much like here and this, and there's a kind of kinship there.
Yeah.
But in terms of the performers, I mean, the thing for us is that, and this is very unique to us. Bye, Amelia. What's perhaps unique to us, and is that we do work with different performers I mean, we've had a couple of performers who've been in multiple pieces of ours, and it's by no means a sort of hard line, like once we work with you as an actor, we won't ever work with you again. That's not the case at all. But we are all, for us, it's very important to consider, and this comes sort of from our artistic agenda, to really consider who the performers are in relationship to the material. And for us, we're always thinking about our work as a kind of portraiture. It's not just about the material, the play itself being sort of, that we imagine these as two of the primary paints in our paint box. It's like, who is saying, what is being said and who is saying it, to put it in really reductive terms. And so because of that, like our piece Employee of the Year, it was performed by 9-year-old girls and this group of 5 9-year-old girls. And it was very much about their identity as children as they were performing this very complicated play.
As you can tell, I guess I keep trying to remind myself that we were meant to be talking about theater company.
Oh.
And I think we always just think about it in terms of what's the show we're making. Yeah. But I want to bring it, I think it's helpful for us if we talk about theater company stuff, because I think that's what we're...
I mean, I think that in terms of people we like to work with over and over again, it's like, yeah, I think what makes someone a great partner is their gameness, like being really game, you know? I think that's what most people really want, you know? No one wants to work with someone who's a jerk, you know?
Michael, you're talking about like what you're working on now, and like, how was the experience of making 1,000 Ways? And how was, especially with regards to like the online platform, how was it switching to like an online audio platform in light of like the current situation and stuff?
I think it's challenging because our sense of sort of presence with our work is a little disjointed. Like we come there to do The Fever in 2017, and we are there on the ground. We're there with the audience. We're like in collaboration with the audience. It's all very embodied and shared. And so I'd say that the challenge of working over the telephone is one of the big challenges, is sort of the lack of, we're here. And that disconnect that embodied disconnect, physical disconnect, I find really challenging.
Could I say one other thing about theater companies? I was thinking, wow, I don't know if we've if I've talked about the things that really pertain to what this is, but I want to say one thing which I just realized. We didn't spend any money in our early shows. We
didn't make any money.
We didn't make any money, and we didn't spend any money. We didn't have any money until our third show, really. And I'm really, yeah, well, just a little budget. I mean, we didn't have. It wasn't about bringing things into the room. It wasn't about set design. It wasn't about transformative lighting. It wasn't about costumes. So it was sort of this sort of lean thing where we just thought, okay, well, what's theatrical about what's already here? Mm-hmm. And it was actually when we started to, when we got our first grant, actually, that things got confusing and got complicated. We started spending money on set pieces. I mean, on one hand, it was great because we were able to pay our actors more. I don't want to. That was wonderful, and we've always prioritized paying our team. But it was when we started spending money for. I remember our first big purchase for a set piece, actually. And it was the wrong thing, but we purchased it and we did it. And I don't necessarily think it was the right thing for us to do. And then we learned from that because our next show had one set piece in it that I think cost $150, which was just a fraction of the previous set piece. I'm speaking very abstractly, but we made a show that had one set piece that was $150, and that show managed. I'm thinking about the tarp. Mm-hmm. We made a show where the entire set was a tarp, mm-hmm. and it was a tarp that was hung in the air. And the tarp, I think, came, that we ordered online, and that tarp went all over the world with us in a suitcase. Where when we toured the show, it went to 5, 6, 7, 8 places all over the world, and every place. Even in some of these crazy institutions like the Pompidou Museum or these great opera houses, we would just open our suitcase and put the tarp up in the air. And I'm really grateful for not prioritizing spending money early on, because it was really, really important to us.
Mm-hmm. And just a tiny piece on that is that we were working day jobs, right? We had other jobs that paid our bills. New York is an expensive place to live, and everyone we worked with, we had to work at crazy hours of the day, sometimes at 8 a.m., sometimes starting at 8 p.m. so that all of us could work out whatever our jobs were. But it was the thing that gave us the most artistic freedom. And so that was we continue to prioritize that it wasn't a company strategy, it was an emotional strategy, but I'm going to call it a strategy. Okay, sorry. We're webbing.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask, this is kind of a broad question, but I thought I had to ask it on behalf of all of our students who are going to graduate soon and kind of don't know what to do, at least speaking for myself. Do you have any advice for somebody who wants to forge their own path in theater like you did, in terms of creating work that doesn't have a defined genre yet, or forming your own company, or just doing something that's sort of not exists, entering the system in an existing company and working your way through that? How would do you have any advice for that sort of path?
Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea where you want to live?
No. And that's another thing. I think a lot of people at NYUAD, a lot of us, we come from different countries. We go to Abu Dhabi and then we want to go somewhere else or stay there, or just a lot of people want to be around the place. How do you do that? How do you establish? How do you tour? That was a lot of questions in one.
Yeah. I mean, Step one, find somebody who also wants to do something. Do something together and negotiate what that feels like. Mm-hmm. Negotiate what feels good, what feels bad, and then it'll be over, and then do it again. So you just need one person, and you just need to make something. And it doesn't really matter what that is. It doesn't necessarily need to be live. It could be a video. It could be a radio play. It could be live performance. It could be street performance. I mean, I just want to say something that I hope is the work that we're making now, and the work that I made when I was 22, or that Abby made when she was 22 or 23. It's like, you would not recognize. You'd recognize tiny bits, but, you know? You know, I mean, I thought I wanted to be one type of artist at 22, 23, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. That was that was exploration of one type of art making. And so it takes some time, but I think find somebody who also wants to do it, and just hold hands and try to figure out what you're going to make together. And you don't even have to make together, but make in tandem, so that you've got somebody. It's like, you're going to work on your piece. Was the first show I made out of undergrad. I had a friend who wanted to make a solo piece, and I was working on this solo performance. And so we said, great, let's both rent the studio, and we're going to do a show. And it was like, it was one of those things, like Michael was saying, is like, we just picked a date and we found a room, and a theater is just a room with chairs in it, you know, if that. Yeah. So, and she and I were not working in tandem, but we just, that way it was like someone else was going to be there. And if I didn't show up, someone would know. And I needed to feel that kind of accountability. And so I'd say what Michael said is like, find someone, make sure that you're making. And if you've got like the two knobs, which are sort of like your creative output, and the other knob is like your level of anxiety and worry, like whether that's logistical worry or worrying about what if this isn't any good, what if it, like sometimes when that worry knob gets turned up all the way, it can be creatively paralyzing, because what if I'm doing it wrong, or what if I don't know which is the right choice. Whatever you can do to turn down that worry knob, whether it's working under quick timing, like doesn't matter, you have to make it by tomorrow. Whether it's having someone else come in and watch, whatever you can do to recalibrate that worry, anxiety knob down, because it's important that it's there, because it's also, it's like a sister knob to the one that's going, this isn't good enough. Like I gotta fix that part. It's a sister to who's like evaluating, being like, I got to keep tinkering on this section, or, oh, there's something missing. They're related, but just make sure that worry knob isn't up all the way. Because when the volume is up on that, you can't do anything else. I would say, don't let an idea stay in your head for too long without doing anything about it. I went through a period, actually after I had an incredible summer. This is a long time ago. Where I actually directed, I think, 3 plays in 2 months. It was incredible. It was a wonderful experience. And then I came back from that experience, and at first I was depressed, just to kind of like, I'm blue. And then I was deeply depressed. And then I was absolutely paralyzed. And then I was catatonic. And then I was angry. I think there was a period of anger. And I wish that I had just said, wow, I had this incredible summer, and now in 6 weeks, I've got to do something else. Don't stay still too long. And ideas are great, but they're kind of nothing until you actually turn it into something else. You can turn it into anything. You can turn it into a diorama, and then turn it into a monologue, and then turn it into a costume, and then a radio play, and then a dance. But don't get stuck in the journaling phase, because if you are interested in performance, it's because you like expression and you like liveness. And so you like being in the room with other people. So make that happen in whatever small way you can. Also, I think that's sort of like as a sister to that idea is that don't overvalue like what's a good idea and what's a bad idea. It's like, I don't know about you, but the shows I really like, if I describe, they're terrible ideas, but they're done really well. So like waiting for the best idea or refining your idea before you're actually working from it, like let ideas come from practice as opposed to stasis. I was just looking at the question in chat.
Yeah, we can move on to like the questions from everybody else actually. Thank you so much for this conversation. I think it was super inspiring because like, yeah, it's just been difficult staying indoors, I think, for a lot of us. So yeah, thanks a lot for like inspiring us to actually make work from wherever we're doing. So yeah, without any further ado, so questions from the chat. Bia, I think that's how to pronounce your name. So Bia said, one question that continuously goes through the mind of an artist is, how can you promote your work and start or sustain a company during the pandemic, especially when we are considering a section of the arts like theater that is heavily dependent on live performance? Also, did the concept of liveness change for you during these times?
I mean, we didn't begin during a pandemic. So on the one hand, I want to say, I don't know. But at the other hand, it's like,
I mean, we're navigating this moment just like you. We're all in the same place here, which is like,
you know, some of you folks were in the workshop that we did the other day, and one of the things we talked about at the end was that this is a bit reductive, and so I'm not trying to be dismissive of the severity of this moment. But there is the thing that it's just another restriction. There are always restrictions. Our restriction when we were leaving college was that there were no spaces for us to do anything. We had to sort of find a weird little hole in the wall where we could make our work. That was a restriction. We didn't have any money. Like, there were all these other restrictions. And though I know the scale of this is crazy and very different and also threatening in an existential way, I think that to me, it's like putting your thumb over the opening of a hose, right? Like, the water will come out no matter what. And in fact, it's going to come out with more force because of the added restriction. So I'd say the same rules apply. Make deadlines, make work. You don't know what it necessarily is going to be if your training has all been embodied in a theater studio, but you have a room, you have now some platforms where the thing that is afforded to you is that no one has to be anywhere at any given point. So now your piece that Shalini, you're going to go make your piece and we can come see it. Whereas the limitation of space and time was something that would have prevented that before. So I'd say the same things apply. It's just make.
You know, I'm looking at the other questions. It doesn't, you know, there's a question about space. It doesn't matter what the space.
I think we need to read the questions out loud so that.
I have a question about a theater space. I'm not sure if you mentioned partnerships with specific venues, but do you own a rent space? Do you own or rent a space to work and collaborate? Is it a priority for you to have a theater space? It doesn't, like I said, we just made do. I mean, if you saw this church basement, you would probably think this is not really a space to make a show in, but it doesn't really matter.
It came with severe limitations. It was freezing and there was no heat, and we made a show there in the summer. So that meant, and that show, that was a piece that we made called The Record, where we would have to rehearse these like 8-hour days. And so it meant standing up, not sitting down because you'd freeze to death, and wearing like 4 sweaters and a jacket. You know, it's
I
like
think the main thing is, you know, don't worry about making the right choice.
Yeah.
I think it's just about, I mean, you want to be careful not to overthink something. I think just go with what, you know, find somebody to work with, start working with them, find a space. I think, like I said, the main priority for us was finding a place that was cheap or free, because we didn't want to be watching the clock and sort of writing the checks. So it was like we just found the first space that we could find, and we didn't think at any point, oh, well, is this the right space, the wrong space, or a different space? We just did it.
And so, yeah, I think what you're saying is like, you get a space, maybe it's the wrong choice, and you'll be like, oh, this isn't working for me anymore. So I'm going to do this for 3 months, and then I'm going to let go of the space, or not. Yeah, I think that's right.
There was another question on the chat, I think, that we missed. So from Alexandra, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. She says, you mentioned mentors coming from a non-student, non-theater studies background, person who wants to make a play. Would you usually stick to one mentor or several? especially if a mentor early on abandoned you or just got completely out of touch, and you're left with a Dropbox full of initial material, but no idea about the right process to go on. And there surely isn't just one way, which is even more puzzling.
I think that there's a kind of, Alexandra, this sense of like right way to do it or wrong way to do it. I'd say mentorship for us has never been official, right? Like it's never been someone who is in any sort of I mean, you click with some people and you don't with others. You click with this teacher and you don't with that teacher. A mentor could be a visiting artist who's come to NYU Abu Dhabi. It could be someone from your childhood. It could be someone who, it could be Lindsay. Like it could be all of these people or none of those people, and you're going to find them. And for us, I think there have been mentors that came right at the right moment, and they gave us, and mentors, it's sort of unofficial, right? Like they were just people that we interacted with, and sometimes they came in at this perfect moment to say the one thing, and I've never spoken to them since. Or there have been people who have been present in our lives, and oh, I didn't really talk to her much that year, but now I talk to her maybe once a month and we're friends. That imagining it as a friendship is, I think, important. If this person expresses that they can no longer help you or they ghost or whatever, then maybe they're not your mentor anymore.
We talked abstractly about asking people for help, but I want to make sure it's clear that you need to be asking for something specific, because you can't just ask somebody out to coffee and then just sort of ask them these broad general questions. You have to know what you're asking. You have to know what you're trying to achieve. You have to think specifically about what you're trying to make happen between you and this person, which sounds more strategic than it is, but you can't just say, how do you do it? Or can you help me? That's too abstract. You have to say, hey, I wanted to get together with you because I'm hoping you can introduce me to this person because I'm working on this project and I think you know them. Would you help me?
Right.
Or I'm working on this one project and I need you to look at this one thing. We're really struggling with it. Can you take a look? But if you're not specific,
it's hard.
There's no way to help. There's no way to help.
I had someone who asked me, who just wanted to, I didn't know this person. They said, I would love to just see if we could have a phone conversation. Someone introduced us and she wanted to speak because she was making a piece that involved the audience. And we got on the phone and she didn't really have a specific question. She just wanted to hear me talk about that. And to be honest, I was like, there's so much to say. Like, what do you want from me? It would have been much more helpful if she was like, hey, there's this specific thing I would be curious to pick your brain about. But
I think it's fine to have a mentor that you sort of like I have a couple people in my life who are like spiritual art spiritual mentors, and I love spending time with them. One in particular, I think she's just, being with her is incredibly inspiring. I don't need to have an agenda with her. I just want to have dinner and hear her talk and use being with her as an opportunity to give me some perspective. But that's one specific mentor that I'm thinking of. And then there's others that I'm like, okay, I don't have a lot of time with this person. I better have a specific ask. I can only email them a 1-paragraph thing. And I can only ask for one thing. And they're either going to give it to me or they won't, but it's all going to be based on if I'm specific. So you kind of have to know what you're doing.
So we have another question from Ethan. Going off of the topic of sustainability, how do you ensure your next project feels like growth? How do you ensure you're moving forward onto a new project, that you're building on what comes before and the new project is somehow more?
That's like,
I mean,
it's like a gut thing.
I think it's don't let yourself off the hook. Make sure that you're not just remaking I think it's about just being knowing that you can't remake a show you've already made. And if you're working on something and it's really easy, that means that you're not looking at the, look, I actually think that all of our shows are pretty much about the same thing. We've been making the same show over and over for probably 5, 6, 7 shows. And I don't want to get into what that thing is because we'll be talking about that for a while and you'll have to hear me mumble through it. But the thing is, I do think that each project, I think every project we make is scratching at the same itch. But we're always, if we finish a project, we close that up and then we go somewhere else and we look at it, we look at the same issue from another angle. So we're you know, it's not that we necessarily need a radically different idea. It's that we have to change our diet, our mentality, our sort of the way that we're looking at it, our vision into the thing. I know that sounds super abstract, but that is growth. Sometimes growth is like making this, is like scratching the same itch, but from a different place. You know, it's like, I'm still working on this topic. Like my first 3 shows were all about one specific thing, but they were all so different. And it was because I was constantly, I'm thinking back to, but the new project is somehow more. I mean, also don't put, but at the same time, Ethan, like, don't put pressure on yourself to make something more.
Right.
It's okay to just be like, I don't know if this is more or less, but I'm going to focus on shifting positions.
It's sort of like you will never be the same person, right? Like we would never make the pieces that we made in 2010 because we're now very different people 10 years later. And so I think giving yourself permission to change, to evolve, like be an evolving, expanding human being, read, you know, like read the news, like read books, so that the input that's coming in that comprises who you are is going to keep shifting. So even though maybe we keep making the same show, the we is the thing that has changed.
Oh, one more thing I could say about this is that we are always copying some idea. We're always starting with something that's already been made. Let me clarify.
Emulating is a useful creative tool.
Yeah, so like
I'm going to copy that person, especially when you're young. And I think it's something we did when we were like, I know I did when I was like 22. I was like, I'm going to make a version of that kind of show, but it was never, I could never copy exactly. It would always be mine.
Or we'll see a movie and we'll be like, oh my God, what an interesting, look how they, you know, there's a couple movies that have been incredibly inspiring to us. You would never, if you look at the piece and I told you like, wow, we were inspired by Days of Heaven, or, you know, whatever, all these series of movies, like you would never, but it was almost like we go, okay, let's try to make this project from this lens a little bit. Or like, what if we just sort of scratch the same itch, but like holding this baggage with us, like this movie, which kind of doesn't really have anything to do with that it. I keep referring to it as an itch, but I don't know. I think Ethan, I think it's just like
make sure your worry knob isn't so high that it's preventing you, and make sure it isn't so low that you're letting yourself off the hook.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we have time for like a few last words before we close up. So, I mean, you've answered most of my questions, but I was just wondering, like, if you could tell like somebody who wants to make art desperately but doesn't know, like, should I write a script? Should I like improvise? Should I devise? Should I get a collaborator? What do I do? How do I begin making this art? Whatever it is, like, if you could give them like one piece of advice each, like, what would it be?
On how to begin?
Yeah, like if somebody wanted to make something and didn't know where to start, how would you sort of write that?
I would say you know where to start.
Yeah.
That's my first response. I would say go into a room, move the tables.
Or don't.
And start.
Assume you know what you're doing. Assume you know what you're doing.
Look, we don't ever know how to start either. You're always, you never know how to start. So either, or you can go into the room and just start. We always start without knowing. We don't know. We don't have a concept. We just start. We literally sometimes go into a room. We force ourselves to say, we go into a room and we start. And
it's forcing every single time. It's always forcing. It's always hard.
You're not going to logically have a place to start. You're going to sketch, you're going to make something, you're going to say a sentence, you're going to write a song, and then you're going to look at it and then you're going to shift it. But there is no logical start. There's just blind faith that the only way it's going to happen is standing up and walking into the room. It's like,
or putting a pencil down onto the piece of paper, or moving your arms in a particular way. Like, it is all a beginning. Just begin. I
want to make sure that you don't think that this is really how we work. This is true. I want to make sure that it doesn't feel like, yeah, okay, but that's not really, that can't possibly be, but it is. We don't start, we go into the room.
I have a last question. So from Smriti, I had the chance to experience the fever in 2017, and that show has stayed with me ever since. I'm wondering what your philosophy around participatory work is, and I wonder what the dangers or risks of creating participatory work is without making it a gimmick. I didn't know how else to phrase this. I hope this question makes sense.
Thank you, Smriti, for saying those kind things. I wouldn't say that we subscribe to a particular philosophy. I think the thing about that work for us, we don't like participatory work. Like, the idea of a participatory theater show is like, we both went, It came from a crisis. It wasn't that piece. We didn't begin that piece knowing it was going to be performed by the audience. That came late in. And for us, it was actually when we realized the piece was about participation, was about, will you do this? Will you stand up? Will you not? It was subject matter. It was content. So I'd say the question about, without making it a gimmick, for us, it wasn't just a skin that we were applying to something. For us, it was at the core of what we were asking in the project itself and what we knew we were trying to ask.
I think oftentimes for us, the form of the project relates to the thing that we're exploring. And that has been a useful tool for us. 1,000 Ways is a project that's built where people talk on the telephone. It's also a project about disconnect. And so in some ways we built a shell, we created a form around a feeling that a theme that we're exploring. So I think that we didn't start with participatory theater. We started with a question of coexistence, participation, responsibility, witnessing versus acting. We started with a lot of ideas that came out of our lives and things that we were thinking about. And then we thought, oh, well, then if we're interested in those things, then I wonder if we could make something whereby the audience is actually dealing with those questions themselves. So to make a long story short, we often devise some kind of a form that satisfies the question. Our show, The Record, is the same way. Our show, Employee of the Year, is the same way. There's one show that wasn't that at all. Chanting, well, anyway, there's some kind of
for those of you who were in the workshop the other day, right, it's this thing that Carlos was talking about. Instead of being like, your form's over here and your content is over here, they have to do this. And so it's always a process of being like that. I talked about the seesaw, right? Like, you're always checking in with this side. Now it's like, let's check in with this side and let's check in with this side again. That you can't exclusively look at one or the other. You have to be considering them both as sides of a coin.
I guess it's like I'm going to make a show about seeing in the dark, and it's like, okay, turn the lights off. Let's do. Forget that. Or I want to make a show. I want to make a show about vision. Turn the lights off. Okay.
Thank you so much, Abby and Michael, for this great conversation. And thank you, Shalini, for your good moderation. I would just like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. And just a reminder to you all to please book your tickets for 1,000 Ways, a phone call. It's running from Wednesday to Sunday, so you've got the last few days to book your tickets. And then also just a reminder to sign up for Akash Odedra workshop. It's an intermediate advanced contemporary workshop scheduled for tomorrow evening. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for being here with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Shalini, for moderating.
Thank you so much.
Showing up. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.